So welcome to part 3 of this series of videos looking at the Allen Heath ZED mixer. In this video we're going to take out one of these 4 stereo cards. To do that I need to take out this master bus card, which is held down with glue at each end and there's a cable tie in the middle. And then we'll also have to take out this power supply unit before we can lift out the stereo card. Then we'll lift it out and have a look at it and compare it to the mono card. The power supply is held in by a number of machine screws. Some of them go into captive nuts, but some of them go into self-locking nuts that could easily fall off and get lost. We'll be very careful not to lose them as we take these screws out. The main power input connector is held in with 2 screws that go into self-locking nuts. Once we've removed all the screws, there's a small earth cable that needs to be desoldered as well before we can actually swing the power supply out of the way. So here's a close-up look at the power supply. It has a nice big chunky mains switch. There's some mains filtering, some common mode chokes, and a couple of big hefty input capacitors. There's also this fuse holder which is both glued down and held down with a cable tie, which is good considering the amount of pressure that's put on it when you're removing and inserting the fuse. There's 2 large input capacitors, then the switching circuit and the main switching MOSFET attached to an L-shaped heatsink. The heatsink is screwed to the back of the unit when it's fully assembled. Then the main switching transformer. After the main switching transformer, on the output side, there's the regulation and smoothing capacitors, and there's 2 fixed voltage linear regulators and 1 adjustable output linear regulator. This power supply generates 3 output voltages. There's a plus 15 volts, a minus 15 volts and a plus 48 volts for the phantom power. The 4th lead is the common ground connection. If we take a look at the rear of the board, you can see that on the mains input side there are good beefy traces for the mains with loads of separation. But there's quite a lot of residue flux on the board, probably from the manufacturing process. Now it is probably safe enough to leave it there, but I don't like seeing a lot of flux on the bottom of the boards, so we'll clean this off later. So I'll just put the power supply board out of the way for the time being, and I'll remove this master distribution board. It's held down with this cable tie, and like I said, the glue's already been broken at both ends, so I'll just prise it up carefully from the channel cards and the main output mix cards. You can see that this board is completely passive. There's no electronics on it at all. It's purely a bus connector board. Has a date code of week 30 2008, which will be when this PCB was manufactured, not necessarily when the mixer desk was assembled. Time now, I think, for a close-up look at the 4 stereo channel cards. 3 of them are identical. Exactly the same component layout all the way down, and very similar construction to the mono channel cards that we looked at. Lots of electrolytic caps and the switches and the Alps sliders for the fader. The faders are slightly wider than the mono channels because they're stereo faders. So let's flip this unit over and set about removing one of the stereo channel cards from it. Begin by removing all the caps from the pots, and then it's a matter of taking out the 2 screws on the fader, 1 screw on the phono input connector, and then all the ring nuts that hold the pots down. Again, being very careful not to scratch the paintwork here when we're doing this. Eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed at this point that I've forgotten to remove the 2 ring nuts from the input jacks, which is why I can't get the board out now. Oh, there you go, I've remembered now. Now that all the retaining nuts and screws are out of the way, we should be able to lift out this stereo card, and we'll get to take our first close-up look at it. It's obviously very similar to the mono card that we took out, with the exception that there's no XLR jack input, we have a stereo phono input instead. But then it follows very similar layout. All the surface mount components on one side, and the through-hole components on the other, and it's a single-sided PCB. Lift the mixer out of the way just now, we can take a closer look at this stereo channel card. There we have the pre-fade listen and the mute switch at the left, followed by all the pots for pan left and right, the 4 auxiliary sends, and a 2-band EQ and a gain control. And a high quality Alps 100mm stereo fader. On the reverse, very similar again to the mono channel card, we have a dual stereo phono input. And if you look at the traces carefully, you can see they disappear into the connector first and off onto the master bus distribution card before returning to go through gain and EQ and the 4 auxiliary sends. Now, it was one of the stereo channel cards that was breaking through when the mute button was still pushed. So here's a close-up look at the mute switch. And here's a comparison between the mono channel card at the bottom and the stereo channel card at the top. There's not a lot of significant difference between the two. So that's a look at the stereo card in this Allen Heath Z24 mixer. In the next video we'll clean out all the mechanical switches and see if we've resolved the problem. If you like these videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, just ask them in the comments section below. I'll be happy to answer them.